hundreds of millions of dollars, actually 4 billion by our count, that is waiting to be deployed. So the message to founders is to be patient. If you're struggling right now, and this is, I think, not just in sports tech, this is across industries, hold on. There is capital waiting to hit the market.
Welcome to Keep IT Healthy podcast, a show hosted by people making things happen in technology, aiming to optimize healthcare delivery, health, well-being, and fitness. My name is Jan Kamiński and I'm the co-founder of AppLover, a company dedicated to improving the quality of life with IT solutions and digital advisory. We started making this podcast to amplify great thinking to propel healthcare forward. Our guest today is Rohn Malhotra, co-founder of SportsTechX. Thanks for joining the podcast today. And I want to start with a question that I ask all of our guests to give some context to our audience. So essentially, your background. Could you tell us about your background? And what interests me the most is essentially the transition from KPMG to the sport tech industry. And what was the inspiration to enter this niche?
Thanks for having me, Jan. A few pit stops on that journey between KPMG and SportsTechX. There was a pretty long pit stop in the middle. I was born and bred in India, in Goa, for any of your listeners who are familiar with the region. And I lived most of my life, most of my adult life, my schooling, my college, my first job, everything in Bangalore, which is also in the south of India. So Goa is on the coast. So I grew up on the beach. I have some amazing memories of that. And then most of my life grew up in a big city in Bangalore, which is the IT capital, the startup capital, the tech capital of India. And still, it was through the late 90s and still is today pretty much. I started my career in consulting. It was a job straight out of college. No big story behind that. They were one amongst many companies that came to campus for recruitment. I liked the idea, spoke to a few people. Consulting sounded like a interesting enough job versus going into banking or any of the other sectors that everybody else was going into. I studied commerce. And then that turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made, completely by chance, because my short stint in KPMG was only about 2.5 years. But that background in consulting, which is super horizontal, you get exposed to a bunch of different industries pretty early, pretty quick. That was a great setting for my career, to the ability to go in, learn things quickly, and then adapt and find ways to add value. I think those skills, apart from some harder skills, technical skills like Word and Office and Excel and things like that, which I use till today, all of that happened in KPMG. I spent a lot of time consulting in the Middle East and Africa. So in Dubai, in India a bit, of course, but mainly in Dubai, in parts of Africa, in Rwanda and Swaziland. And I would do these long, like 3 months, 6 months at a time stints. So again, got to travel, got exposed to new cultures, countries that I would never go to otherwise. I haven't been since, and they're unlikely that they will be destinations that I travel to on work probably anytime soon. So KPMG was an amazing experience for me. But I think very early in my career, I realized that I didn't want to do a corporate job. The idea of wearing a tie and a suit to work, didn't really strike with me. I'm more of a t-shirts and kind of guy. And I had a best friend, one of my really good friends, who had this idea that he wanted to make t-shirts for our school that we graduated from together. And this was a very nascent idea, merchandise, official memorabilia or merchandise for your school, college, your alma mater. And that idea grew into a business called Alma Mater. We ran that business together started in 2009 for about 8-9 years, did a couple of rounds of funding, became the biggest in its category in India, became a category leader in India in customized merchandise. We got pretty big and pretty famous. There was a book about us and a movie, and we were on the cover of, like, got a good amount of press coverage. And eventually I sold that business in 2017. The reason was, I think, and I was pretty young when I started. I was 24 when I set up the company. But after that initial buzz of, hey, you're a startup founder and you're doing something exciting and all that, but after like 5 or 6 years, we're just selling t-shirts. We're not really changing the world. And I think I fell out of love with the business. I enjoyed the team and the people and the exciting journey of hiring and growing and all of that. But once we got to a bit of stability, And yeah, I think I just we realized that we hit a kind of a plateau with where we could scale, and I wanted to do something else. So in 2017, I eventually sold that business, and that fueled unfunded my move to Europe. My ex girlfriend at the time was living in Barcelona, and I just went and sat in her house for 3 months. And at that time, already sports was an emerging topic in my head. That hey, it's a growing business. There's so much more money in India and everywhere in the world. And I also stumbled upon this topic of sports tech, which was marrying innovation and entrepreneurship with sports, which is what I loved. So set up base in Barcelona, then traveled around Europe, met people in Berlin, which is where I am now, in Paris and other places. And through those travels, eventually met my co-founder Ben, and yeah, started off on the journey of exploring the sports tech space.
I have a few questions, but I'll start with the beginning. With the consulting work, just out of curiosity, because we had some guests here starting the consulting, and their, let's say, common thing they said was that they were a little bit tired with the the job because they didn't really see the outcome. You know, they were working for their clients, but the outcome wasn't there, and they were kind of tired with Excel type of work, or maybe not Excel, but like PowerPoint type of work.
Yep.
Is it your? Is it also, or you had a completely different impression, and your experience is just different?
No, I can understand that. And I think I would probably say mine was similar in some ways. I was quite young, like I said. I was only 20, 23, 24 at the time. I was 24 when I left already, so 21, 22 when I joined. So at that time, everything is new and exciting, and you don't really know what's happening. But looking back, yeah, all we were doing was making PowerPoints and doing research. And I don't know how much of any of the PowerPoints that I made, I must have made hundreds of them, how many of them actually were used beyond that final presentation that we gave. Um, so I think that's part of it. But at the time, I didn't think of it that way. At the time, I enjoyed it. At the time, you're traveling all the time. So I can, like now, if I was traveling the way I was, like I'm 37 now, if I was traveling the way I was then, I would be probably really tired and feel fatigued. But at 21, you're like, hey, every Thursday you're flying here, flying there, you're going to new places, meeting new people. So all of that stuff, all of the stuff that I loved about consulting then, I might probably not enjoy as much now. But you're right. I think the idea that consultants are only about blah blah blah, and you do a lot of presentations, and you do, and I'm not saying they don't add value, but it you don't always see it through. You make a lot of suggestions, but how much of that gets implemented, I don't know. So I can see that argument. We do a bit of consulting now, but not in that way. We try to do more research, like, hey, you're asking me for an opinion, here is some data to support the answer. And so we do a bit of consulting or presenting the sports tech market, for example. We try to do it, but I try to stay away from that idea of consulting.
Okay. And with the first business that was a success, so Alma Mater store, because that was an e-commerce, right? You were only selling online.
Yeah,
Okay. And
primarily online. Yeah.
so could you share some? And that was what were the years that you were scaling more or less?
Yeah, so online and events, but yeah, 90% plus of our business was online. We set up in 2009, while I was still at KPMG, kind of like shadowing job a bit, and I quit by early 2010. Like we set up mid 29, by early 2010, I already knew like this was the thing, and we did our first round of funding, I think in early 12. So conversations through the second half of 2011. So in the first couple of years already, we saw good traction. Like I think for the first 3 years, we tripled our revenue. I think we tripled our revenue every year till we hit like 1 million or something in year 4. So I mean, for two guys who were like not even barely 25, 26, that was great. Like we were super excited. We were quite happy with what we were executing at. Um, yeah, I think those first 3 4 years, and you're hiring people and you're growing, there's so many moving parts, because you're just understanding what investment is and what angel investing in and what a series A, like all of these things were so new. um, so yeah, I think that period from 2010 10 when we both kind of went in full time till about 14, 15 was like super, super exciting.
In regards to that, could you share some of the key learnings from your experience? You mentioned fundraising, you mentioned team management. So what were those?
Yeah, I think that's the stuff that you hear of more, yeah, which is more traditional for a startup founder to say, like how to hire people, how to fire people on occasion when you need to, how to be flexible and be able to pivot. But I'll focus on a couple of specific ones that I hold very strongly till today. Um, I think the first was that not having competition is not always a good thing. Like competition is good. Why I say that is because for the first four, like that category that we were operating in didn't exist before we thought this, like, hey, nobody else is doing this, we should do it. And that was great for us. And that was great for us to grow to that, like I said, million revenue point or around that figure. um, but the challenge of that was when we went to investors for our Series A conversation and to do more, they were like, "So hey, you're what we call now a tent pole industry, which is, hey, you're the one who's holding up this whole tent. Where is anybody else? Who else is under this tent?" And we realized that actually, yeah, there wasn't a lot of competition. We were the market maker, so it was very difficult to justify how big this market is. And that became like a weird learning at the end. Like I'd go into Series A kind of pitch meetings where we're trying to raise like 2.5, 3 million, and they be you always get this kind of like, "Good job, boys, well done, nice try." And I was like, "Man, you guys are nuts. Like, how do you not see this? We're making revenue. Like, we've got huge audience. Like, everybody loves us. We're getting so much traction, so much love on social media, so much press and all of this." And in hindsight, they were right, because now, even almost 13 years after we started, that category is still not huge. It's not like that category, it's like we were just too early and then the category took off. No, that till today, and there are many challenges for it, which we don't have to get into, price and logistics and blah blah blah. But that was a super interesting learning for me, which was that don't be afraid of competition, and I mean, understand it, react to it, and work with it. But competition is good. It's more validation. More people entering your market is a good thing. I hear this even now from startup founders that nobody does what we do. Like, is there a reason for that? Is that because nobody else is interested in doing what you do? So think, I mean, that was one very powerful, very specific learning that I took away. I would say the other was to fail quick, which was also an idea that I didn't really understand then. But like I said, for year 4 or 5, we were growing like super well. But then after that, we kind of plateaued because we didn't have the extra revenue to kind of fuel our growth. And we were kind of profitable, but we didn't have a lot of money ourselves to invest so like we kind of hit a plateau, and we thought we were doing good, but that plateau lasted maybe 2 years, 2.5 years, and that was already too long. Like, we needed to be quicker and to be more dynamic. So yeah, a couple of things I would say: don't be afraid of competition, try and fail quick. Before you know it, 5, 6, 7, 8 years are gone, and you're like, hey, what really happened? So I have many learnings from that journey that I carry with me in our current ventures and when talking to startups.
I'm not an expert in that field, obviously, but I know a few founders in this sector in Europe. I mean, essentially clothes for universities. And when I talked with them, the common problem was with the clients. So your clients are university students that will eventually become, I mean, they will just stop being students, and then you just lose a particular client base, and then you need to, of course, you have another ones because there are another year coming, but still it's a quick it's a quite a different market than just like a standard e-commerce, I don't know, t-shirt shop or something. What were your experiences with that?
Actually, I disagree with that idea. I think the power was that we were building a brand with a very young audience. So, what will happen with us, for example, is that you're right. First of all, that supply is never ending. As long as the university is there, you're always going to have customers, right? But the interesting thing is that you always have a new supply of new customers because the older customers, they still like, I mean, they're not going to buy a lot of stuff, but they still like wearing maybe having a couple of t-shirts in their wardrobe from their university. Or what would very often happen with us is that a lot of these guys and girls would graduate and then start working at big companies, whatever, Amazon, Google, wherever they go, and then they would want their Amazon hoodies and t-shirts made by us. So they became like a really good lead gen for us. Like that, they would carry our brand into wherever they went. So we started getting we started in schools and colleges, but very quickly we were doing a lot of work for corporates.
So
Uh,
it was like white label later. I thought it's on because I thought you mentioned like alma mater. I thought it was only for universities, but it also was for companies that made their own
I
branded.
would I would say it was not purely white label. We did some pure white label stuff. It was mainly co-branded. Like it's like the football jersey. You're wearing a Manchester United shirt, but it is also a Nike shirt, right? Or an
Right.
Adidas shirt. So the Adidas logo is on there. Our alma mater logo was always on all our merch, but it's an Amazon shirt made by alma mater. It's a Google shirt made by alma mater. So
Yeah.
that was the idea that we went for. So our brand always remained fairly prominent, but the idea was that this is your shirt for your group, and it not just became corporates. It was any, like, you could have a drama group of 20 people and they'd want their merch made. So it was very much, it started in schools and colleges, and what it became was a community play. So not just for the corporates, it might be that specific team within Amazon or whatever. Like they just want their 10 t-shirts or 20 t-shirts made, and it's this collective identity thing that we were tapping into. That you want merch for your batch, for your school, for your class, and that's the big group. But then you can keep making, okay, I want it only for my class, I want it only for my sports guys, I want it only for the football guys, I want it only for the first year football guys. And it keeps getting into this smaller group, which is this community affinity thing. And that's where the real power of the alma mater brand shone through, because people felt that we were talking to them and helping them identify, hey, you and I, we go together because we wear the same merch. And you're seeing that a lot manifest in many different ways with other tech, but we can get to that.
Okay. But I want to come back to the Sport Tech X. So
Mhm.
if you, I mean, of course I know it, but like if you can explain it for the audience, like what is it? Like what's your main, let's say, goals, mission, and like what's the company all about?
Sure. And I'll start with the origin story of SportsTechX, which is that when I met Ben, he was basically doing publishing like overviews of what is happening in the sports tech world in different parts of Europe. So, what's the sports tech ecosystem in DACH region, which is where we're based, or in Benelux, or in Iberia, or UK, whatever. And what that was just an overview of how many startups there are, and categorizing the startups into what we developed, which is the Sports Tech X framework. So Ben had like this version of the framework that he had developed, and he was working with that and just doing these. He was just writing like little blog posts and putting it up, and that's when I came across it. And I was like, hey, actually, this sounds really cool. Let me do this research for other markets. So I did it for India, for Australia, for Southeast Asia, so on. So what we quickly realized was that, and a goal of the research project was for me to find which specific sector of sports tech would be where I would launch my next startup. So it was just to identify like which areas are hot right now. What we realized is that actually the research itself was valuable. That people were paying us to either appear in our content, to be associated with our content. That hey, we're supporting this kind of quality research, or just paying directly for the data itself. So that's what sports tech is we're a market research company for sports innovation. Our job is to know what are the latest trends, who are the hottest startups, who are the leading investors in the world of sports innovation anywhere in the world. So comparing all of this in the US versus Europe versus Asia, that is at the core of what SportsTechX is. Market research and market intelligence for the sports innovation space. What we do with this base core layer of research is a few different things that we monetize. The first is our content, which is probably what we're best known for. We have these detailed reports, which is basically our flagship product. So the the Global Sports Tech Ecosystem Report, which I think we started publishing in 2019, and the Global Sports Tech VC Report, which we started in the following year. So it's been published every year since then. And these are like state of the industry, like a 40, 50 page PDF with lots of graphs and charts and interviews and all that kind of stuff to present what's happening in this market. So we start with reports, and we have a newsletter and a podcast and video content and like a bunch of social stuff. And yeah, there's a full team which is running our media business. And our media business monetizes like a media business does, either through paid advertising, sponsorship, or through some paid content. So some content is behind a paywall, like our database, or like we have a free version of the report and there'll be a pro version of the report. So some paid content, but primarily through advertising and sponsorship. The second part of our business is Connect, where we connect startups to investors for fundraising. So either on the startup side or on the investor side. So sometimes we work with the investors to find startups in a particular topic. So say, I don't know, like, hey, some fan engagement solutions based out of Germany for some German clubs or something like that. Or we work on the startup side, which is, hey, find me some capital, find me good investors. So that's fairly straightforward. I'm also a partner at a venture partner / investment director at a European sports tech VC. So we have now a partner fund that we work with, and also work with a network of investors. So that's part two. And part three, I mentioned earlier in the conversation, is that we do a bit of consulting, but our consult is usually research-based consulting. So for example, we just did a project with the Bundesliga, with the DFL, which is a white paper on 5G in sports. So they want to present as a thought leader in the space, and they will say, hey, Rohn, can you like write a report for us, and we'll co-brand it and give you some materials. Basically, we do the research and present it. Sometimes we do private research, or sometimes we do public research. Like there are a few papers that we published. Otherwise, we'll do private research to educate an investor on a particular sport or a market or a particular sector or anything of that sort. Or we do like workshops. Hey, here's what's happening in sports tech. Here's a one-day workshop to educate you on what's happening in the sports tech world, all the latest trends, all the data, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's essentially what sports tech is we're a media business. We do some startup investor services, and we do a bit of consulting.
But okay, but I'm sure we have a few sport tech startups listening to us. So how does your company support them in the sport tech ecosystem because as I understand, it's okay, fundraising and some business development, but is it like you take a cut out of the deal, or is it like a paid service? What's the model?
Yeah, so first of all, we don't do business development. That's one thing that I make a distinction between. We don't do client conversations, we do investor conversations. And there's a reason for that. I don't like the business development one is a harder one to track. But so when we do investor conversations, yes, we take a small, a success fee based on any funding that we help a startup raise. So that's one model. Another way that we work with startups is, and these are the paid models. So another way is through our marketing. So a lot of times startups will want to reach our audience of investors or sports teams, blah, blah, blah. So they will pay us to advertise in our content. So there are a couple of paid ways that we work with startups. But beyond that, my job is also to constantly be interacting with startups because A, I think it's beneficial for us to find high quality startups for our own fund to invest in, and B, just generally to build visibility in the ecosystem. I'll give you an example. So every month this year, we've started a new thing in 23, where every month we pick up a new theme, and all our content for that month is focused on that theme. So we've done months on AI in sports, or women tech for women's sports, or tech for differently abled people. Last month for October was cricket tech, because I'm from India and cricket is big for us, and also the Cricket World Cup was going on. Now, so when we do these months, we will usually find one or two startups that we like, that we want to promote, and this is not paid. So we'll reach out and say, hey, would you like to come on our podcast? We do maybe a newsletter feature. So depending if it fits our topic, then we will happy to do some paid stuff or some free stuff to promote startups, because the right we feel like, yeah, the right startups should be presented to a wider audience. So it's not just paid stuff that we engage with startups on. We will do free things as long as it's within our topics. But for the paid stuff, it's usually through marketing or through, like I said, on a success fee on any funding that we help them raise.
Okay, I get that, but in a sense, also, the company itself somehow helps you because you're a venture partner in the VC you mentioned. So essentially, also kind of like a machine to just fuel the VC as well. I mean, in a sense, somehow you probably take some of the startups that just approach you, and you're able to pitch it in front of the VC that is just connected with you directly.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I mean, it's a win-win in that way, that we try to generate, like, we put out a lot of content to get visibility in the market, which will help attract the best quality startups reaching out to us, which fuels our deal flow. And if we can execute deals, then that's better for the ecosystem, for the startup first of all, and also for the ecosystem in general. So yeah, absolutely. I'm always on the lookout for the most interesting startups that we can plug into our own pipeline, or if not with our own fund, then at least bring it to our investor network.
Okay, is there any particular interest? For example, I don't know, hardware or data or something, or it doesn't
Yeah,
matter?
well, depends. So different investors have different thesis, or have a different thesis that they will work with. So our job is to know what each investor is usually looking for. Like, so some funds will only do consumer facing, so they're not interested in any B2B companies. Some funds are more hardware focused. Some funds, sorry, will say no to hardware completely. They're not interested in touching it. So our job is to know what fund looks at what. For our own partner fund, yeah, there are some specific topics that we look at. The fund Indigo has a good track record in hardware, actually. So we've helped them do a couple of investments in hardware. They've done a few more before that. They've also traditionally had a really strong focus on football. So we've again looked in one particular industry, one particular sport, and try to find connections there, because then that's a good kind of their own portfolio of companies has a good ecosystem between them, so they can build some synergy between their own portfolio. But beyond that, I mean, and I don't know if we'll get there, but there are so many areas of sports tech that are super interesting. On automated media production is really hot right now. We can talk about Web3. It's gone through its hype cycle. It's gone dead right now, but it feels like it's making a decent comeback. We can talk about AI. We can talk about fitness. I mean, there are many areas. Sports tech and sports in general is growing in a bunch of different areas, which is what makes it an exciting place to be right now.
Maybe it will be just an obvious question, but isn't that most of those? I mean, the startups that actually get funded in a more let's say faster pace are the ones from the sport industry that are just so popular as football or basketball. I mean, probably there are five disciplines that matter in a sense financially, and then the rest is significantly under, let's say, under those budgets that these disciplines have. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think I mean, this is a capitalist market by definition. So the money follows the money in most ways. That said, what you'll be surprised by the number of other industries where you might not think of them, or the other sports where you might not think of them, but there is a lot of capital because there is a lot of interest. Fishing is a good example. Fishing as a sport is not one that you traditionally think of, but people who get into fishing, they're usually the average demographic is kind of a middle-aged, so 35 plus male, who's probably a man of means. So he's got a bit of money, likes to invest in his leisure. So fishing is his hobby of choice. So if this is his hobby of choice, then he'll spend a lot of money, and whether it's interesting devices or tackles or apps that will help him find the right
Right.
fishing spots, or travel that's built around this hobby. So That's just one example. Ultra marathons and ultra sports are another example where people, when they get in, they will unlock value in super interesting ways. Golf is another one, which might not be the biggest sport, but yeah, there is a lot of money, a lot of tech, and a lot of innovation which follows it because of the purchasing power of the people behind it. So my point is that it's not only the most popular sports that you watch on TV that always attract the most capital. The investors will go where they find the highest possibility for return. This is the definition of a VC. Then this is not an altruistic or not profit business. These are guys who are, their job is to provide a return to their investors. So they're looking for the maximum avenues for return, and it's not only in football and basketball. For sure, there are many other areas of sports tech which can give them that return.
With that, like when you were starting the company and you were entering the sport tech industry, what were the biggest challenge that you faced? From they can be either from the industry perspective, but also your model in a sense, kind of a media model perspective. But what were them?
I think from the industry, so let me take that in two parts. From the industry perspective, so we started in 2018 kind of rough, and 2019 full time. It still felt a bit early. Like it felt like sports tech was still like this niche kind of, junior part of the entire industry, which people are kind of giving attention to, but not really thinking so much about yet. Which is also exciting because my question was, hey, I don't know if we're early. Are we too early? Is the question, but we're definitely early, which is a nice place to catch an industry. So at that time, there was a lot of education that we had to do about, and like you wouldn't find too many sports teams with an innovation manager or somebody who's like looking after this topic, either from leagues or teams or the industry in general. We've seen that change drastically over the last few years. So that's been what started out as a challenge has now become, okay, it's gone from niche to it's increasingly becoming mainstream. And you don't have to take my word for it. Just the simple fact that Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google, like all these big tech companies are now investing in sports by buying up sports properties and in bidding for sports rights. All of that has happened in the last 2 years, all post COVID, right? And that was not the case 5 years ago. So I think that shift in the industry is very clear. Sports tech has gone from this niche kind of side industry to now this is a big part. Sports is a big part of every conversation. So that was a challenge to get over the early days. Today, I think there are different challenges. I think today sports is it's teething issues, or growing issues, growing pains, whatever you want to call it. That is this industry which is trying to break out, but it's having challenges of finding scale. The models that were used, especially in Europe, the way sports businesses were run were usually family-run businesses or community-based businesses. These are not built as profit multiplying.
Or 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 public, right? That's also the problem. I mean, in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. The Germany is a classic example. The 50+1 rule does put on in the 50+1 rule in football. For anybody who doesn't know, by default, 51% of every club is owned by its members, by its fans. But now that inherently limits the commercial potential of a club because the way the fans would want to grow things is different from the way a private shareholder would, and that is in a lot of ways a very good thing as well. Don't get me wrong, I'm not only purely capitalist. I think this is a very strong sustainable way to grow sport. But the classic example I'll give you here is Formula One. Formula One was run for decades, for for half a century, from the 50s right up until the early 2000s. It's kind of this cool elitist thing that was this like the playground of the rich playboys, and it was sexy and exciting and stuff, but didn't really make money. People went in there to only lose money, and yeah, you had a decent loyal fan base who were either gearheads who liked cars or just like the excitement of racing. Cut to after the investment from Liberty, and a lot of these were family-run teams, running under losses or run by rich billionaires or something. Cut to now, where after the investment from Liberty Media, which is kind of professionalized the way the things are run, put in a salary cap, taken taken Formula One to new markets. The whole thing has changed. I put up a post on LinkedIn, I think just earlier this week, where Lawrence Stroll, who owns the Aston Martin F1 team, bought that team for 90 million pounds in 2018. Yeah, so just 5 years ago, for 90 million in a distress sale. Force India, who were the previous property that he bought it from, which was an Indian billionaire who was going bankrupt. So a lot of like these billionaires always finds ways to go bankrupt. I don't know why. For 90 million 5 years ago, to like last week or earlier this week, Arctos Partners, which has a huge portfolio of sports companies, made a minority investment in Aston Martin F1 for 1 billion pounds. So from 90 million to 1 billion in 5 years, that's a CAGR of, I did this calculation, like almost 70% year on year for 5 years. That is insane growth. That is just to give you an idea of the scale that the sport has achieved. And that is one example of the success. But this is also has to happen across different sports. The Italian league, the Serie A is a good example. The La Liga is struggling. French league, you can see how much they're struggling with their broadcasting rights and stuff. So these growing pains are there in a lot of areas. How does sports get more professional? The digital transformation, quote unquote, of sports is going on, and that brings with it a lot of pain. But people are persevering because they see the potential of it that they can unlock to make the investment at the right times. Yeah, I think from an industry perspective, that's what I would say. From personally for SportsTechX, it has been lots of interesting challenges finding audiences in Europe. It's a bit more conservative way of thinking, whereas companies who do what we do in the US have bigger audiences. It's a bigger market. We see that media businesses are traditionally not very good businesses to run today because nobody really pays for content. Everybody wants their content for free. So how do you find ways to monetize? Okay, you have to find advertisers, but then you have to, again, through COVID and through these, like there was a lot of money, there was not a lot of money at all in COVID, then there was a lot of money for a year, and then there's no money again in this market. So it brings its own challenges of finding your audience. But yeah, all those are exciting challenges that we're happy to take on.
You said a few things about the landscape of sport tech, and I know you entered the industry in 2018, more or less. But based on the experience, because you've been doing that for, I mean, looking at the trends, looking at the companies for like 5 years now, what trends do you anticipate in the coming years?
Yeah, and this is something that we will talk about more in our next report, which should be out in a couple of weeks. So our next VC report, Sports Tech VC report, will be out either around November 30th or first week of December, somewhere like that. We will cover there. So for anybody who's listening, you can go to sportstechx.com/reports and download the full one. But to answer your question quickly, because we're just doing this analysis, there are 3 or 4 key trends. So number one, again, we just published some content around this, is the number of new investors or new entrants in the sports tech market is really important to note. Why that is because 2023 was a really bad year for funding, for investment. 21 was an incredible year, was a breakout year post-COVID, over $12 billion invested in sports tech. 22 was a good follow-up year, about $8.5 billion, which is more than any of the previous 5 years combined. And then 23 has been just fallen off a cliff. I think we've barely crossed 2 billion. The reason for that is it's not just sports tech. Across the investment landscape, deal flow has been at an all-time low. You speak to any investor, any startup founder, capital is at a premium. But at the same time, we've seen that it's not okay. Investment activity has not been happening, but M&A activity is at an all-time high. Again, higher than any year that we've been seeing since 2014. We've been tracking the space. So that's super interesting to see as well. So it's not like there's no capital, it's just being redistributed. This is what we're going to call it as the year of consolidation, where sports tech also understands as an industry that you can't have 5 guys or 10 guys doing the same thing. You need 2 or 3 big players to get to a certain scale and to get rid of the let's say the lower quality startups, and they will get acquired. Hopefully that talent will come into the main company and they can build and scale better. So this is what we're seeing a lot of. So M&A activity. on one side. And on the other side is, like I mentioned, new investors. So new investors are constantly coming into the market. Over 31 new funds were announced in 2023 for sports tech. And this is new capital waiting to be deployed. So on one side, you've said, hey, there's not much investment activity, there's some M&A, but like there's not much capital. But at the other side, you've got a lot of new investors coming in with, you know, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, actually 4 billion by our count, that is waiting to be deployed. So the message to founders is to be patient. If you're struggling right now, and this is, I think, not just in sports tech, this is across industries, hold on. There is capital waiting to hit the market, but it's a test from investors to founders that, hey, who are the ones that can really survive? How can they, financially eke out this period, adapt business models, etc., do whatever they need to do, and it'll be the survival of the fittest, and the fittest will be rewarded. It really feels like that. So that's one thing that I would say, that there is a lot of new investment and new capital waiting to be deployed. The other thing that I would say in terms of sectors, maybe you'd be curious, automated video production or AI-based video content creation and content distribution. Let's not just say video. Let's say content. It's a bit more blanket. Automated content creation and distribution is huge. People are hungry for content. There's no question about it. And it's not just, I think there is a lot of data on, or a lot of, let's say, theories on it's only short form, like 60-second, 90-second clips. No, we're also seeing a good uptake in long form content, in 1 hour plus, like 2 hour plus, like long series kind of formats, like podcasts like this people consume. So anything which helps you create this content very quickly and get it out very quickly is really powerful. We've seen strong funding trends on this area in the past, especially over the last 12, 18 months or so. So anything which fuels, helps a sports right holder, like, because they have so much content, not just on the match day. They have training footage, they have behind the scenes footage, they have access to the players, interviews, like whatever. There's so much that they can do. But how do they get it done and get it out quickly? So anything which helps sports rights holders do that is really powerful. Broadcasting tech, I can talk about, because I mentioned earlier, all the major big tech companies, Apple, Amazon, Google through YouTube, are all buying up sports rights. How do they differentiate? Is by making their stream a bit more innovative. How do they extract value, I guess? How do they get most people paying? By adding more layers. Okay, they might add a betting layer, might add a commerce layer onto their stream. What kind of innovation that can they bring on the stream itself to make it more interactive or make it more immersive for the viewer? Body cams and 360 kind of degree VR headsets which will immerse them in the place. So, and those are just some examples, but there's a lot of innovation in broadcasting tech. So content creation and distribution is one thing. The other is live sports broadcasting, where you're going to see a lot of innovation. The third and fourth, I mean, I could go on with a few, but fitness tech is a big trend. Recovery and fitness. Everybody, not just professional athletes, in general, we live in a world today that is a bit healthier. There's a bit more conscious of what you put in your body and how you train, etc. So that trend has been running and will continue to run. AI in different ways in the way it interacts. We can talk about NFTs and Web3 and the different applications. And that NFT thing is kind of gone, thankfully. But what are the core applications of that technology? How do smart contracts really benefit the sports industry? And there are lots of applications. Look at ticketing, look at loyalty. So there are, I've named like quite a few already, I think, but there are a few trends that are really exciting that will continue to drive the growth of sports tech.
With the streaming platforms, wasn't that Netflix that also bought the rights to the like sports?
Netflix is not yet. I think Netflix just did their first live sports event. They did
Exactly.
well, but again, it was not really live sports. So they did something which was like a pro, like a golf tournament, which was F1 drivers versus PGA Tour golfers, and they hosted a golf event, and Netflix put that on the air. Netflix has been in talks for a long time whether they will actually start bidding for live, whether it's football or American football or Formula One, because Drive to Survive was the series that you could argue started this whole thing. But yeah, they're also in it. They're also investing in sports properties. They're not yet buying live rights. We don't know if they will, but there's been constant talk for the last 2 3 years that they're going to enter the market as well, which also just it pushes up the price further for or it gives sports rights holders, who by the way are also at the same time exploring DTC streaming, direct to consumer streaming. F1 has F1 TV in India where they do the streaming themselves. La Liga Pass, I think they call it, which they're experimenting with in a couple of Southeast Asian countries. I think it's Vietnam and Cambodia or something. I'm not sure. But there are two countries that La Liga is streaming directly. The NBA, of course, has had their Game Pass for a while, NFL. So all these guys are either looking to stream themselves or they have these big tech companies that they're looking to partner with. And then you have all the traditional guys, the broadcast players. So with so many options, there's going to be a lot of innovation in all these areas, and that's going to be. I think sports viewing is going to be fun for sports fans for a while.
Okay, and with that, because we talked about the industry, but what about Sports Tech X? I mean, in your opinion, what's the future in like 3 to 5 years? Do you want to pivot to some other model? What would be the case?
Hard to predict the future, at least 4 5 years. I don't usually look that far. We have a broad vision that we want to get to. I think for now, the immediate next 12 months, 12 to 18 months will be we continue to do what we do, which is maximize our deal flow, get really good quality startups in our network to our investors, and do more of that. I think that's the big thing. Actually get to deploying more capital rather than just doing research. I mean, our media will continue to churn and we might innovate a bit there, but the main focus is deal flow. In 5 years time, what will we be doing? Maybe we'll have our own fund. Maybe we'll be investing in sports properties. My personal dream is, which is probably not going to happen in 5 years, is to own Manchester United. I think their last valuation was £6 billion. They got an offer, and the Glazer said no. So I'm a little bit short in my own personal wealth of that. I don't know that's realistic at all, but in some way to continue to invest in sports. I'm a huge believer in the power of sports, uh, in the socio cultural political power of it has to change communities, to impact communities, and affect them in a positive way. So I will continue to invest. I've said this a few times that I will own a sports team, whether it's Manchester United or whether it's my daughter's under 14 like neighborhood kids, like whether it's sponsoring them. I don't know whatever I can afford on like this spectrum. I will definitely do, because that's how much I think that it is important to support sports, because it can really affect change for people.
And what about because yeah, I wanted to ask you this about your personal, let's say, personal interests. Like, what are your favorite teams and sports? I see Manchester
um,
United already.
yeah, Manchester United has come up a few times. It's a team that's given me a lot of joy for a long time, and now a lot of pain for a long time. But that's the journey of a sports fan. No problems with that. But I was one of those, like growing up. My mom and the girls I dated in the past would always complain. Like, if there were two drops on a glass on a window and they were coming down, I'd watch that just because it's competition. Like, who's going to get there first? Like, I was obsessed with sports growing up. Was not very good at playing anything. I played a lot, but was like never to a good level. Like, I played for my school and my university and stuff, but never to. I was never in like any national teams or anything, or at a good level. But no, growing up, cricket was the sport of my choice. So of course, I still watch a lot of cricket. And whenever India, we just lost the final against Australia, and a heartbreaking loss, but we'll take that. Football, Manchester United, because they were the first team that was on TV growing up in India. Because I was a huge Beckham guy, still am. He's the my sporting idol in many ways. I tried to play like him. Had the long hair, long ponytail, did all that nonsense. But beyond that, just watch a lot of football in general. Obviously, being here in Germany, you support watch the Bundesliga and La Liga and so on. Formula One, I've mentioned a couple of times. I'm a huge Formula One fan. Watch a lot of the NBA, tennis a bit. Yeah, there are a bunch of sports that I can name. In general, if it's interesting, if there's good competition, yeah, count me in. I'll be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw it on your LinkedIn that you had this interaction with a cricket legend, Gary Kirsten, right? Could you share some insights from the conversation and its impact on sports tech?
Yeah, sure. I'm guessing, Jan, you have no idea who Gary Kirsten is. Probably, at least not until you looked up. Yeah, I don't know how much of your audience would know, but Gary Kirsten is a cricketing legend. He's not. Also, for context, he's not like the five greatest players to ever play the game. Yeah, there are others, but he played over 200 times in total, I think, for his country, for South Africa. So I mean, he's held world records. He had a long, very successful career at the elite level in a tough sport. So already he was like an incredible athlete. But his second innings, his second career as a coach, and in that stint, he helped India win its second ever World Cup in 2011. So when we won, which was at home in India, he was the coach of the Indian cricket team. So he's, for Indians personally, of course, like it's a huge moment. The guy who will help you lift the trophy and such. I was very lucky that actually somebody from his team reached out to me a couple of years ago because he has a startup where he actually educates coaches, cricket coaches. He has a platform where they do video and they do master classes and stuff to help coaches get better because he is an elite coach. He has since then embarked on a very successful coaching career in India, in South Africa, and other parts of the world. And somebody from his team reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you, we'd love to chat with you and get your perspective on what's happening in cricket, and would you be up to chat with Gary?" And it's like, who the hell is Gary? And obviously, then I looked up the company. I was like, oh, he's talking about Gary Kirsten. I had a huge fanboy moment. We had a call a few years ago, just generally chatting, and I introduced them to some investors, and we did some stuff. And then when we were doing our Cricket Tech month, I thought this is a good time to have him on. So he invited Gary on the podcast. He was gracious enough to join us. For me, it was a huge fanboy moment, but also to learn what an elite, it would be like, I don't know, inviting, well, who's the Germany coach now? Hansi Flick is no longer, or Yogi Low, or like somebody who's at the elite, Gareth Southgate, like somebody who's at an elite international coach onto your podcast. So you get obviously to learn a lot from them, get their perspective, like what kind of tech are you looking at, what tech is at, because they're also looking at the game all throughout, not just at the elite level, because they'll also be involved in grassroots. So what do you think is important from coaching at a grassroots perspective to elite, the evolution of cricket or tech in cricket, and we've seen a big change in that as franchise cricket. You might not be familiar with this term, but the way the IPL or the main leagues are set up, like each league has 10 teams. This multi-club ownership that we're seeing in football, where one team has many teams in different leagues, this is a big part of cricket now, where like the Mumbai Indians, who are based in Mumbai, have the New York Indians, or have the Trinidad and Tobago Indians. I don't know if these are their teams, but just an example, right? Like Manchester City has their teams across the world. Like that, it's happening. It's happening in cricket as well. What that does is franchise cricket is now creating a scale. Now I own 4 or 5 teams, so now I'm investing in tech in a better way. I can my facilities are a bit wider. My network. I need to do scouting in 4 or 5 locations, so I need tech to help me do all these kind of things. So we talked a lot about the growth of cricket tech, but overall, I got some personal stories from him about his experience in coaching India, and was just a huge fanboy moment. And yeah, one of the main reasons that I love working in this industry, that I'm first a fan and then a professional. So when you have these moments, you really cherish them.
By the way, for the audience, you need to check Ron's LinkedIn because, as I mentioned, he's sharing a lot of insights from the industry. So they're just a comment on the side. But thanks for sharing that. We always, pretty often, I would say 90%, we ask founders about advices to other founders, and maybe you can share some of yours, but mainly for the sport tech industry. I would like to focus on sport tech founders or other founders that are doing something in this field.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't think I'm really a person in a position to give a lot of advice. It's something like we're all trying. Everybody's trying to figure out their way. There's no right or wrong.
That works for you. That will work for you
Yeah,
from 10 years or 5 years ago.
exactly. That's a good way to put it. That's how I was going to answer it. Like, hey, what would I like to have known starting out? I think one of the joys of working in this industry is that, yeah, you have these incredible fanboy moments. We do events in stadiums, and you get to interact with professional. I've met had the good fortune to meet a lot of professional athletes. It's a great place to work if you're truly passionate about sports and all that. But the main reason is this is a job, and you're probably trying to make money of this job. I don't know how much you're looking to make, or whatever. That's up to you. But this is sports tech presents a very serious opportunity today, not one that was available 5, even 10 years ago to a generation before. Like they could have had a job and made a bit of money and had a good career and got tickets to like all sporting events, but probably very few people got to do that. Today, the sports industry is really growing as it professionalizes. Not so this is not just for startups. This is for anybody looking at the sports industry in general. I'm saying if you're thinking about it, this is a really good time. Even now, it's not too late. Sports will continue to grow, and sports will continue to be a big part of what influences culture, what influences politics, what influences society in general. I'm a big believer of that, and you just have to read the stories around you wherever you live to see examples of that. Specific context for sports tech founders, I think let's address the current moment. I said this a few minutes ago that, yeah, capital is at a premium. Sporting models or business models of how you operate are really getting tested. So for you to find ways to survive is the challenge. And if you can do that, you will be rewarded within specific areas. Look, I think everybody's always excited about working with Real Madrid and Manchester United and the NBA, and they want to work with the elite teams and leagues. But that's actually, when you think about it, a very like after you sell to Manchester United, like there are only 19 other Premier League clubs. There are only four of, and out of those, how many can afford the solution that Manchester United can afford? What I mean by that is that there's a tiering in the sports ecosystem. So it's hard to say that if I sell to one club, then I'm going to set up a B2B business for which is really large. No, the B2B side of sports is actually fairly small in terms of the size of the market. The American market is a bit different because they have 5 professional leagues, but then they have thousands and thousands of colleges. The NCAA is a very wide and rich network because these college grounds all have 120,000 people in them every week, right? So they have the capacity. So B2B solutions in the US are very different from how they work in Europe. And if you go further to smaller markets, those are bigger challenges where sports teams really struggle. So trying to sell to sports teams and leagues is a tough gig. Um, if you're doing that, great, and if you found traction, but I'd always say try to find sports is for the fan. The end consumer is the fan. If you can find a touch point or a way to interact with the end fan, then you're helping the club make money, and therefore you will hopefully make money and build a business that is strong and sustainable. Um, yeah, that's one specific thing I would say about sports tech. Other than that, yeah, sports tech is growing in a bunch of different areas, so you don't have to worry too much about trends. But as always, some trends are moving faster in this moment than others. So be conscious of that. Be aware of what's happening around you, and then grow from there. But to your earlier question, Jan, you talked about is the popular sports are the only ones. I've seen amazing solutions. I came across it yesterday an AI based, computer vision based solution for surfing, which I thought was super cool. There is stuff for equestrian sports, for swimming, for like all sorts of different sports. So it's not that like all of these sports have markets, and they might not be as big as football, which is like 3 or 4 billion people in the world, but they all have big markets. So you don't have to worry about the sport so much, but understand what you're doing in that sport. Are you reaching a wide enough audience? Are you really reaching the end consumer? I think that's worth looking at.
So, just one more question. If someone wants to find you, where can they reach out?
Yeah, sure. If anybody wants to know more about sports tech or just generally get in touch with me, LinkedIn is probably the best place. You can find me, Rohn Malhotra, on LinkedIn, or email me directly, Rohn at sportstechx.com. But in general, I would recommend if you're trying to learn about the industry, just go to our website. You'll find a bunch of resources that will help you understand what's happening in this space.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thanks for joining us today. It was a pleasure talking to you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Jan.
Stay in touch with us, subscribe to our podcast, give us a like, comment, or share. If you want to reach out personally, you can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram.